Leo's story began in a place of despair where he wandered the streets, alone and vulnerable. His coat was matted, his ribs were visible through his fur, and his eyes carried the weight of untold suffering. His past was a mystery, but the signs of neglect and abuse were painfully clear. He was a dog who had been let down by the world, abandoned, forgotten, and left to fend for himself in a harsh environment. Every step Leo took was a step towards survival, and every day felt like a struggle for hope. His spirit had been broken, and it seemed as though nothing could repair the damage done. Then, one fateful afternoon, a rescue group received a tip. Leo had been spotted in an area notorious for abandoned animals, and they knew they had to act fast. Armed with food and a leash, the rescue team set out, hoping to find Leo before the situation worsened. They didn't know what they would encounter, but they knew that Leo needed them, and they were determined to help. When they finally found Leo, he was hiding under a bush, his body trembling. The rescuers approached cautiously, understanding that a dog in Leo's condition might be fearful and defensive. As they reached out to him, Leo flinched, his eyes wide with terror. His instinct was to run, to escape from the people who had come to help him. He didn't trust humans anymore. His past had taught him that people brought pain, not kindness. But the rescue workers were patient. They didn't rush him, they just sat at a distance, offering him food and water, showing him that not all humans were threats. Leo's first interaction with his rescuers was one of deep fear. He wouldn't make eye contact, and the moment anyone moved too fast, he would retreat into the shadows, too frightened to accept their help. His body language screamed one thing: "Please leave me alone." But the team didn't give up. They slowly gained his trust, one small gesture at a time. They knew that Leo's recovery wouldn't happen overnight, but they were ready to do whatever it took. And so, a new chapter of Leo's life began, not with the hope of immediate change, but with the belief that things could get better, little by little. After what seemed like hours of patient coaxing, Leo finally allowed the rescuers to come closer. They were gentle and cautious, slowly approaching him with a leash, letting him smell their hands before they ever attempted to make contact. When they finally clipped the leash onto his collar, it wasn't just an act of securing him, it was the first step in restoring his trust in the world. For Leo, it was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. He had made it through that terrifying moment, and for the first time in a long while, there was a glimmer of hope. The drive to the shelter was quiet. Leo was curled up in the back of the van, still wary, but at least he wasn't fighting the hands that had gently led him away from the street. As they pulled into the shelter, Leo's eyes darted around, unsure of where he was, but for the first time in what seemed like forever, he wasn't running. The shelter was a haven, a place that promised safety, care, and comfort. The rescuers gently led him into a quiet room with soft bedding and a few toys. At first, Leo just stood there, his eyes scanning the new environment, his body tense. The sound of other dogs barking in the distance made him flinch, but he didn't run. He simply watched, unsure of what would happen next. The rescuers stepped back, giving him the space he needed to adjust. They placed a bowl of food and water in front of him, then stood quietly, allowing him to make the choice. Slowly, almost cautiously, Leo approached the food. His ribs were visible, and it was clear that he was starving, but he ate with a gentleness as if he wasn't sure he deserved it. That first meal was more than just sustenance, it was an act of healing. The food was nourishing, but so was the presence of safety around him. As he ate, the tension in his body began to ease. His shoulders, which had been tight with anxiety, began to relax. It wasn't a dramatic shift, but it was something, a first step toward healing. The rescuers stayed in the background, not pushing Leo to interact more than he was comfortable with. They understood that trust couldn't be rushed. It would take time, and they were prepared to give him that time. Over the next few hours, Leo explored the room, sniffing around cautiously, finding small spots to rest. The comfort of a soft bed under his tired body was a welcome change from the cold, hard streets he had known. The warmth of a safe space, just for him, began to soothe the wounds he had carried for so long. As the day came to a close, Leo curled up on his bed, the soft bedding cradling him in a way he hadn't experienced in what felt like forever. He didn't know it yet, but this moment marked the beginning of his transformation. In that small room, surrounded by kindness, Leo started to understand that maybe, just maybe, there was a world out there where he could be loved and cared for. As days passed, Leo's journey to healing was anything but easy. While his physical needs were being met, the emotional scars from his past lingered, weighing heavily on his heart. His fear was palpable. The slightest sound, a quick movement, or the wrong gesture could send him into a frenzy. He would cower in the corner, trembling, his eyes wide with panic, as though the trauma of his past was still chasing him. Every touch seemed to remind him of the hurt he had endured before, and every attempt to bond was met with hesitation, fear, and distrust. Leo's fear of humans was more than just a response to unfamiliar faces. It was a deep-seated anxiety that had been ingrained in him from his past experiences. He didn't know how to trust people anymore. To him, hands reaching out were reminders of pain, not comfort. He had learned to survive on his own, to avoid contact and rely on his instincts. And now, as kind-hearted people tried to show him love, he couldn't fully understand that their intentions were good. Every act of kindness was met with confusion, and every attempt to comfort him seemed to push him further into retreat. One evening, after a particularly hard day where Leo had refused to let anyone near him, one of the rescue workers, a woman named Sarah, sat down quietly beside him. She didn't reach for him, didn't try to coax him into interaction. Instead, she simply sat there, her presence calming but non-intrusive. She spoke softly, letting her voice fill the silence of the room, not with words of expectation, but with words of reassurance. "It's okay, Leo. You're safe here. No one is going to hurt you. I'm here. I won't leave," she whispered. For a long time, Leo didn't move. He didn't acknowledge her words, but he didn't move away either. He stayed still, watching her with eyes full of uncertainty. Sarah didn't push him, she just remained close, quietly letting him know he wasn't alone. In that moment, Leo began to realize something. He was beginning to trust her, even if only a little. He wasn't ready to let anyone touch him yet, but her calm presence was the first real sense of comfort he had experienced in a long time. The next day, Leo made another small leap forward. Sarah offered him a treat, holding it gently in her hand, and for the first time Leo didn't run. He hesitated, his eyes flicking between the treat and her face, but then, after what felt like an eternity, he took a step forward and gently took the treat from her hand. It was a tiny action, one that seemed so insignificant to the outside world, but for Leo it was monumental. He had chosen to trust. He had chosen to let down his guard, even if just for a brief moment. Days turned into weeks, and with every small victory, Leo grew stronger. He began to respond to Sarah's voice with less fear. He started to sit closer to her, eventually lying near her feet, feeling the warmth of her presence without retreating. But even as he progressed, there were setbacks. Some days the fear would return. He would freeze when someone walked too quickly toward him, or flinch when a hand reached too close. On those days, Sarah would remind him gently that it was okay to be afraid, that healing was not a straight line. But every setback was also an opportunity for growth. The more Sarah stayed consistent with her care, the more Leo began to open up. Slowly, with patience and love, he started to understand that not every human was a threat, that not all touches would hurt. With each day, Leo's emotional scars began to heal, though they would never fully disappear. What remained was a dog who had learned, through time, to trust again. And as he began to trust, he began to heal, not just physically, but emotionally. The dog who had once been afraid of every human touch began to crave affection. The dog who had trembled at the sound of footsteps started to wag his tail when Sarah walked into the room. It wasn't a perfect process, but every day brought Leo closer to the peace he had been searching for. As time passed, the changes in Leo were subtle but undeniable. The fearful dog who once cowered in corners was now beginning to show signs of curiosity, a spark of interest in the world around him. Leo was no longer just surviving in the shelter. He was starting to live again. His spirit, once clouded by fear and trauma, began to shine through as he rediscovered the joy that had long been buried beneath layers of pain. One of the first signs that Leo was healing emotionally came when he was given a chance to explore the outdoors. The rescue team decided it was time to take him for a walk, something they had been hesitant to do before. The outdoors had always been a place of danger for Leo, streets filled with uncertainty, people who could harm him, and the harshness of his past. But now things were different. He was no longer the same fearful dog who had hidden from the world. At first, Leo was tentative as he stepped out into the yard, his paws brushing the soft grass beneath him. His head was low, his body stiff with caution. But as the fresh air filled his nostrils, something within him seemed to shift. He paused, sniffing the air deeply, his ears perked up as he listened to the sounds of birds chirping, the breeze rustling through the trees. It was as if, for the first time, he realized the world wasn't all bad. Sarah, the woman who had been by his side from the beginning, walked beside him. She didn't rush him. She let Leo take the lead, allowing him to explore at his own pace. It was a slow process. Leo hesitated, sniffing the ground, pacing back and forth, unsure of what to do with all the new sensations. But then something remarkable happened. Leo started to run. It wasn't a long run, and it wasn't with the confidence of a dog who had always known joy, but it was a run nonetheless. He sprinted a few feet, his body still cautious, but his tail began to wag. A little at first, then more vigorously. He had rediscovered play, and with it, a part of his soul that had been dormant for far too long. Over the next few weeks, Leo's joy became more evident. He began to wag his tail at the sight of Sarah in the mornings. He would eagerly follow her from room to room, his eyes bright with excitement when she reached for his leash. It was as though he had found a new purpose, to love and to be loved. His fear of the outside world had faded, replaced by a sense of excitement and anticipation for the experiences that awaited him each day. Leo's personality started to emerge as well. What was once a quiet, fearful dog, unsure of his surroundings, now began to display the personality of a dog who had rediscovered joy. He would playfully nudge Sarah's hand for attention, eager for affection. He started to show interest in other dogs at the shelter, wagging his tail when he saw them, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. He had learned that the world could be full of good things too, not just pain and fear. It was clear now that Leo wasn't just recovering physically. He was reconnecting with the world. The trauma that had once defined his existence was no longer the dominant force in his life. As each day passed, Leo's spirit grew stronger. The broken dog who had once wandered aimlessly in search of survival was now running, playing, and basking in the simple pleasure of being alive. This chapter in his journey was a testament to resilience. Leo had been through unimaginable hardship, yet he was beginning to find joy again, joy in the world, in companionship, and in the freedom to simply be. The road to healing had been long and difficult, but with each moment of happiness, it became more and more clear that Leo's journey was far from over. It was just beginning. After months of healing, both physically and emotionally, the day Leo had been waiting for finally arrived. It was a day filled with excitement, anticipation, and a touch of bittersweet sadness. The shelter had become Leo's home, a place where he had found safety, love, and the ability to heal. But as much as the team at the shelter had poured their hearts into his recovery, they knew that Leo needed more, a family of his own, someone who would love him unconditionally, give him a permanent home, and continue to nurture the beautiful dog he had become. The call came one morning. A family had seen Leo's story online, and they were eager to meet him. The family had recently lost a dog of their own and had been searching for a new companion to share their lives with. When they read about Leo's journey, they knew they wanted to give him the love and care he deserved. When Leo first met his new family, he was understandably cautious. New faces, new smells, and new sounds surrounded him. But the moment his future family entered the room, there was something different in the air. Leo's ears perked up, and for the first time in his life, he didn't retreat. Instead, he stood still, his body relaxed, curious, but not fearful. It was as if he knew deep down that this was the moment he had been waiting for. He was ready for the next chapter. The family, a couple with 2 young children, approached Leo gently. The children, aware of Leo's past, were careful not to overwhelm him with affection at first. They sat on the floor and let Leo come to them, allowing him to make the first move. It didn't take long before Leo cautiously but surely walked over to them. He sniffed their hands and then, to everyone's surprise, he leaned in, resting his head gently on one of the child's laps. It was a quiet, tender moment, a true sign that Leo had started to trust again. Over the next few days, the family took things slow, letting Leo adjust to his new home. The familiar faces at the shelter stayed in touch, checking in on Leo and offering support to the family. Leo's new family made sure to maintain the gentle approach that had helped him heal in the shelter, giving him space when he needed it and showering him with affection when he was ready. As Leo settled in, the house began to feel like a true home. The first time he ran through his new backyard was a moment of pure joy. His new family watched in awe as Leo, the once fearful dog who had been broken and lost, ran freely, his tail wagging in delight. It was as though the final pieces of his healing had fallen into place. He was no longer the broken dog hiding from the world. He was Leo, a dog full of life, joy, and love. With every passing day, Leo grew more comfortable in his new home. He learned to love the routine, the morning walks, and the family meals shared together. His new family showered him with affection, but they also gave him the space he needed to continue his healing journey. The love they provided wasn't just a cure, it was a continuation of the care he had received at the shelter. Leo had finally found the place where he belonged, the family who would love him forever. His transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The dog who had been a shadow of his former self, who had feared every human touch, had now become a beloved member of a family. Leo's story wasn't just about survival, it was about the power of love, patience, and a second chance. His journey was a testament to the resilience of animals and the incredible impact that love and kindness can have on a soul that has known nothing but hardship. As Leo curled up at the foot of his new family's bed, at the end of his first night in his forever home, he had no way of knowing the full extent of his transformation. He had come so far from a street dog with no hope to a cherished companion. But in that quiet moment, as he drifted off to sleep, Leo knew one thing for sure. He was home, he was safe, and for the first time in his life, he was truly loved.